Hello,
Hi.
everybody. Hi. Today we are on the Solutions podcast and the Patreon Solutionist chat with Alexie Sommer. So, hi, Alexie. And
Hello, Nicola.
uh,
Very happy to be here.
we were just together at the experts meeting at the Design Council. Obviously, Alexie has been a lot longer than me, an expert in the Design Council, but we're kind of riding this wave together. So I just really, when I was looking at your website, I love that you introduce yourself as a hybrid designer.
Yeah.
Just wonder if you could kind of explain to us what is a hybrid designer.
It's a Swiss Army knife, Nicola. It's like, I studied as a graphic designer. So right back at, the beginning, communication, art and design. I came out of the Royal College with a communication, art and design, MA, but I was designing chairs out of cardboard, out of recycled cardboard. I was designing posters for kind of anti-crime on the underground. I was doing a lot of things. And then when you start to run your own practice, you become very good at pivoting and responding to kind of what's needed. So, I mean, from hybrid design, I love the fact that I put that. It was probably at some point when I was doing both digital and physical work. But I'd say my role now has become it's I've sort of I've having crafted for about 20 years, I now find myself very much in the strategy and direction and kind of research space where I'm looking at kind of where we need things to go. And then that links very heavily into education and educational experiences. So I would say now that I'm designing almost more educational experiences than graphics, let's say, I've sort of left the kind of pure crafting of graphic design behind a little bit. So the evolution of a designer, let's say.
Okay, right. Well, when we were at the meeting the other day, I love the saying that waste is a design flaw
Yeah,
because there's so much focus on the end of the product's life and recycling, but actually somebody somewhere has designed that product. And that
absolutely.
you were saying how you've been taking designers to the waste dump and showing them what their produce, where it's ending, the products are in, and how they could design backwards. So can you speak a little bit about that and how's that going?
Totally. So I'm in the throes of curating and managing a program called Design Skills for Embedding Circularity. And the core experience of this program is to take designers to end of life facilities, to industrial waste facilities, to MRFs, which is a material recovery facility, or PERFs, which is a plastic recovery facility, or even landfills, to see where our things end up and what's happening with them. And it's like opening a can of worms. Honestly, you suddenly realize there's so many steps in the process to go from a kind of wasted product for it to be then sorted, recycled, reprocessed, and then come back into the market. And you realize designers have very, very little knowledge of this. But I think what's also a challenge is that at design school, we learn about the double down and design process, but we don't start at the end. We start at the beginning. We start with the client brief, what they're looking for, what they want, the service they require. Very rarely do we go, what's going to happen at the end of the life of this product? And how are we going to bring it back into the system? That's not a question we've been asking ourselves as designers really up until about 10 years ago, when the idea of the circular economy or the theory of the circular economy became a really kind of key idea and framework to start building business around. So, kind of Ellen MacArthur and the Great Recovery were early projects in sort of, let's say, 2010, 2011, 2012, really starting to kind of look at the role of business and the role of design in terms of circularity. And sort of 10 years on, we're doing this in a much more immersive way. So, really taking designers to understand the technical processes of waste so that they can go, oh, right. So actually, really, the best packaging we should produce has no color or no decoration. How am I going to tell my client that? So, like I was saying just before we started this conversation, we've just done a session about plastics recycling. And, you know, that's not the way we've been designing things to date. And designers don't necessarily have that information at hand when they're looking at a brand's design brief. So it's very interesting and really complex, and you have to take a systemic view. So that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Also, we were having a little chat before, and I was saying I just posted about this whole new kind of copper mining extraction that's about to happen in an Ecuadorian indigenous territory. And I wonder how many designers actually know, going right back to the start, where those ingredients come from.
Yes, not just the diversity challenges of extraction, but also the social challenges. Two really key factors that are not included in the, let's say, the price of copper necessarily, the price of gold or the price of crude oil. They don't seem to be factored in as we understand it, or the consequences. On the program, we had a conversation with Jean-Gabriel Léonard, who made a documentary about the mining of coltan, and it's a very similar expose narrative of children who are digging in the mud to extract coltan, which is a transition mineral that's in every electronic device that we're using. Now we need that. We need that for all our telephones and laptops and everything to function, but very few people understand where that comes from and the consequences of that extraction. And, there's a big question here about the kind of true value of minerals, elements, the materials that we're using, and do we know enough as designers about where these things are coming from? So I totally agree with you. Part of the program is to really kind of open designers' eyes to that
Mm.
and to kind of then help influence the idea of circularity because like we were saying, the tragedy is you need something like a war to push up the price of crude oil, which then makes virgin plastic more expensive, which means that recycled plastic is, comparative. Because at the moment, if you're recycling something, recycled plastic is more expensive than virgin plastic, which seems ridiculous when we're trying to get to a circular economy. And that's where really we need to be because there's enough material in the system to last us, thousands of lifetimes. Yet we're chucking it all away.
And we
So
see the same with minerals, don't we? I mean, it'd be interesting again to see the prices of copper, virgin copper in relation to, recycled copper, something which can be like it kind of infinitely recycled. And I remember a little while ago seeing a post on somewhere in India where they're recycling electronics. And it was like, wait, what year are we in? 2026. And there are these guys sitting there smashing up these phones and these laptops in this way to try and extract these minerals. And it really, really shows where that design came in. It wasn't taken into consideration that there would be some little guy sitting there with a hammer, smashing it up to try and extract these minerals out of it. So, it's such a crucial subject for designers to really look at, how at the end of this life are we going to get these minerals out so we don't have to keep drilling more and more national parks.
that's so interesting. You reminded me of a great installation at Waste Age, which was a show that the Design Museum put on in 2021, which was the role, to highlight the role of designers in designing out waste. And there was a fantastic installation there called Madma 40, which was exactly that. It was filmed in Ghana and it was in electronic waste recycling facilities, which had absolutely no safe health and safety requirements, guys in flip-flops, not even with masks, bashing things apart, you know, unfortunately exposed to all those kind of toxic materials and fumes, and they were trying to extract some of the valuable materials from these electronic devices. And this is contemporary practice, and we ship a lot of our waste, and it's processed in that way. The reason we were working on that show, which was very interesting, is that we were doing an environmental audit of the exhibition itself. So this is work that I do at Urge Collective. We work with cultural institutions to help them understand the impact of exhibitions. And this links back to carbon emissions, doing an LCA of an exhibition to give it a carbon footprint so you can understand the impact of what creating culture looks like on some level. And what was so fascinating about that piece of work, it was very controversial because it was shipped over from Ghana, all these TVs, but it was shipped all the way over, and they didn't need to be. They could have just been sourced in Kensington next to the Design Museum. So everything has an impact. And this is not pointing fingers. This is not about criticizing. This is about just understanding better ways to do and make things that are more realistic. And, you know, do you understand what the impact of something is as a designer, and can you reduce that, the environmental or the negative social environmental impact of what you're creating? So
And
that's
it seems that it's like almost a new conversation, whether it's theatre sets or museums or, all of these places where they're continually changing the designs of their look. And to, oh, all of a sudden it's like, oh, this we shouldn't just be throwing it away. How can we reuse this or kind of design that in from the beginning? But it just seems so interesting that we have become, it's just so embedded in this world of waste that that's accepted as normal. Yeah,
a lot of institutions are doing working really hard to try and change that. Actually, we've just done a great project at the end of last year, doing an audit on Thirst, which is the Welcome Collection show about water. And they've got a really fantastic set of guidelines for the way they're producing exhibitions at the Welcome Collection. And they're really trying to shift the system. And they're talking about kind of creating a, innovative materials laboratory so they can actually start scaling low impact materials. So for Thirst, they used, instead of MDF, they used these fiber boards that were made from um,
mycelium.
they were mycelium, they were from wetlands, so and from hemp and from straw. And so they have a much lower environmental impact in the way that they're made. Actually something like wetlands can sequester, huge amounts of carbon. And if you think of the process of making MDF, it's a relatively toxic, and it's basically all the kind of remains of the wood kind of squeezed together in a kind of quite toxic resin. And that is your MDF panel, but it's such a kind of industrialized system that it's incredibly cheap in terms of kind of its material sheet prices. But the bigger consequences of that system are really not cheap. So it's how do you support innovative material makers who are a small scale cottage industry, and how do you enable them to grow? So the Welcome Collection, through their last exhibition, we're doing that with these fiber boards. So really interesting and really trying to push that. And yeah, there's some practice, there's a lot of work happening in this space, and talking about a shared economy across institutions. The V&A is doing some great work, the Design Museum is doing some great work. So they're really starting to shift the dial. And I mean, a lot of this is about those who consume culture. So you and I, people who like to go to exhibitions, people who like to kind of see new things. I mean, we're there to kind of absorb the information. I'm not sure how much we're influenced by how different the shows are, and how, maybe we'd be happy if it was similar structures but with new content and we could engage in that. So I
And
think
how
there is
much that's kind of, how much that's part of the show,
yeah.
really incorporating that information, as, yeah, as part of the exhibit. And I was really shocked when I went up to, there was the David Attenborough Our Planet exhibition, which was amazing, as you can imagine, these huge screens and, have the best footage. And, you really, really went into depth about climate change. It really was an absolutely amazing exhibition. But then you walked out and there was no, what can you do? Which has
Yeah.
always been this passion of mine of like, okay, we need really clearly to signpost. Now, here's a list of things that you can do. And and there was nothing. There was absolutely nothing at the end of this exhibition that could tell people where to go, what to do. So it feels like we're missing out sometimes on that education when people are walking around. So, but it's so good to hear that it is changing.
Yeah, I think it is changing, but you're totally right. There's always that opportunity to engage audiences, because once they've gone through a process of going to an exhibition, learning about something, they're totally inspired and ready to kind of make that change. Whereas if you'd got them a couple of hours before, they might have not been so interested. So, but I think it's, that there is a role as a museum, as a cultural organization, as a catalyst, but they potentially don't see their role as that of then influencing kind of personal people's actions. So, a lot of these are personal choices. But yeah,
But it's the system, isn't it, that needs to change. And how do we shift from this very linear system that we're currently in now, and we're in this meta crisis. There are so many issues that many people just become so overwhelmed that then there's just this apathy, the feeling that they can't really do anything. And so, when we're talking about systems change, where do we even begin? What do you think on, looking at systems change
I
as
think,
to your
yeah,
perspective?
it's so interesting. I really think this is a personal and a collective question. So I think the personal question to ask yourself is how much is enough? And what have I got the capacity and capability to do without killing myself in the process because it's too hard to do? And those are simple things like, um, can I buy unpackaged food, for example? Or can I take the bicycle instead of the car? Or can I just think about kind of the areas of my life, if I know about it, that may be the ones that are having the most impact? And can try and sort of step back a bit from that? And then there's the kind of collective challenges of, well, I'm a designer, I'm part of a design sector. You know, I think my practice is doing good, but I'm not that sure. And I'm isolated, I'm on my own, for example. So then how do I connect with others who are doing similar things? And how can we share knowledge and how can we understand what we could do collectively? And I often think the collective idea is so much stronger. You can do all this great stuff in isolation, but then you get a bit angry and frustrated because you don't see other people doing it. Whereas what we've noticed with Design Declares, so one of my hats is I co-instigated Design Declares back in 2022. Um, and it's a global community of digital communication service and industrial designers who have signed a declaration that there's a climate crisis. They want to respond with the tools of our industry to create a better future through design. So it's a powerful group of people who are really engaged and really care and really want to do something. And what I've noticed time and time again is the events that we put on are really powerful because designers are quite often quite isolated in, oh, I'm not sure which way to go. Come together, start exchanging, share ideas. And often it's a throwaway conversation from someone about a project that you're working on that gives you the solution that inspires you to do something else. So I'm sort of talking around it, and we talked about systemic things, but I think sharing knowledge is a key part of it, and education is a key part of it. That to me is foundational. And then understanding where we have influence, how we consume or how we move around, what mobility choices we make, all these things. But then, what is our agency and influence, and how do we help others see a different journey or see a different solution? And then if we talk about systems, we talk about business, we talk about politics. It's very chicken and egg. Who has the influence and who has the power? But sort of waiting for policy to change, whereas actually it needs to be businesses who take the incentive and just shift, and then actually policy follows. So yeah,
Yeah, it
it's
is. It's a very multifaceted, isn't it? It's like,
yeah.
people will say, "Oh, but I'm just one person." It's like, well, when 8 billion people say, "I'm just one person," we start to see, actually how big we are as a collective, as a consumer. I mean, I came out with this saying, we should just call ourselves Homo consumus
Yes.
because that's
That,
really what we do right now. We are just really good at consuming. But I love to turn it round to looking at the communication aspect of, if we study a forest system and we think, these incredibly resilient systems that generally, when you look at a forest, it's healthy. Of course, there'll be dead wood, which is part of a healthy system. You desperately need dead wood in a forest. But what can we learn from them? As far as communication, education is like sharing nutrients, and every part in the ecosystem knows what its role is. It has a part to play, it communicates with everything around it, and it stays in this balance. And when something comes through, there's this incredible resilience, this way of rebounding. And it feels like, that's where we're getting now into this. We know it's not working. Something's got to change. So have we got to wait until we have some apocalypse and some catastrophic, is that what we got to wait for? Or is there another way that we can actually start getting these feedback mechanisms to create change? So it's interesting. It feels like how most people get their education. Once upon a time it was word of mouth, then it was books, then it was the news and the radio, and now a lot of people it's just through social media.
Yeah.
So we're in these silos.
But I sort of I get really inspired by actually sort of, new businesses coming onto the market who are interested in keeping things small and, decentralizing power and money and finance, let's say. I think those are really interesting models. There's a lot of collective movements, so co-living movements, or people wanting to kind of share resources and pooling resources. I think there's a real mindset in resistance and antithesis of all the tech that isolates us and all the consumption that actually leaves us feeling emptier than we did before when we bought it. So I think there is this kind of real search for something that has more authenticity with all this information overload that we've got at the moment. But it's about how you kind of self-manage and kind of enable yourself to have the capacity to kind of share when you're just kind of at some points feel like you're just fighting to survive against this kind of wave of information and tech and things shifting and changing so quickly. I mean, let's not even start on AI, you know.
That's a whole other series.
But I know.
I'd
But
like to talk
all
a bit
the
about businesses that are, being brave enough to make these changes, like Interface. Yeah, and I use them in examples when I'm speaking about biomimicry. Here we have massive carpet company. Really, the so much wrong with that industry. But for them to look closely at the business and say, well, how can we turn this around?
yeah.
And so how can we change the way we think around? And I love that, whole Ray Anders's, the love carbon, which, we vilify carbon. And we forget that actually, we all so depend on it. Carbon's what makes the world go round.
Oh, it's an essential reason. In fact, that Love Carbon campaign, Sophie Thomas and myself designed a poster for Interface for Clerkenwell Design Week, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago now, which was the Love Carbon mission. Because I've worked on off with Interface over the years, and they've been doing some interesting things about, really kind of sequestering carbon back through their system. So they're coming out with kind of carbon neutral and or carbon positive, products. And if only every business understood that. And I think this is a basic lack of kind of education. And that sounds terrible to say that, but I think it is an awareness thing. If businesses understood this from the get-go, they would be motivated to change. I'm convinced of it. Maybe not all of them, but the majority of them would. But I mean, there's organizations like Patagonia also doing some fantastic stuff across the globe. And, but they are still making money from sports apparel. But that's one guy who had a vision, who loved climbing, who made really great climbing tech. And then he was wearing a very cool beanie one day and he realized that everyone loved his beanie. And then, it spiraled and he was then making all this money from sports apparel, from climbing clothing. And he decided he really wanted to shift the system within that business. Um, and, there's so many great examples. We were talking about this earlier as well, Lawyers for Nature. How do you ensure that there's a kind of really strong thread of planetary consciousness on the board? How do you enable people to understand this on a kind of deeper systemic level within a business?
Yeah, I
So
think that, Faith in Nature, when they came out with the nature on the board, giving a chair at the board meetings,
that's great.
it's just, that way of thinking really opens up to have this space, to have this, this input in from the natural world of how this would affect. So there does seem like there is some new great ideas coming through, and hopefully some of these businesses that are doing the right thing, who are leading by example, will be replicated. But
Well, going
that
back,
Karen.
but I just wanted to go back to some of, the way that you can innovate with business. I mean, we were having a lot of conversations just earlier today on, we were listening to Recoup, who are a charity who actually look at plastics recycling across the UK, and they said they've had the most innovative leaps when they bring together different businesses across the supply chain. So they did a whole kind of test on milk bottles, and they brought everyone who was invested, so the milk producers to the packaging manufacturers to the kind of the end of life facility managers, and they said, well, look, we've got a real problem here because we can't recycle these bottles. And they came up with the standard milk bottle that we know with the lid attached now as it is, and they changed the colour from the colour being in the lids to colour them being in the labels. And they've come up with a really robust solution where you can actually really recover materials through that system. But that was only enabled through innovation across kind of 4 or 5 businesses on a supply chain. So that to me is the way to do it. Really kind of lay the grounds for kind of a design sprint process and say, we've got a big problem here. What are our solutions? But you bring everyone together who's involved, because if there's one person in the who's, key in that the chain and the link in the chain, let's say, and they're not there, then it will fall down. So I think that's a future kind of hope, is that more businesses collaborate on that level through supply chains.
And obviously, you can't end without talking about the importance of art,
Yeah.
because the creative industry and music and art, again, it's so not valued anymore. But it feels like it's so important for us to have those. A picture speaks 1,000 words. We know that it can be
Yeah.
really powerful through imagery, not through having to just have loads of words. And yeah, so just where we can bring in more art into communication.
It's so interesting you're talking about that. I'm working on a personal project at the moment called Useful Totems, which is a project that's been brewing for about 7 years. And all good things come to those who wait. I keep telling myself, because it may take another 7 years for this project. No, it's happening and it's emerging this year. And I was first inspired by a kind of hatred of using cling film in the kitchen. I'm like, God, I don't want to use this cling film all the time and throw it away. So I initially wanted to design a set of tableware that's stacked and I could store leftovers in the fridge and it would be in glass. And then I went to Ambiente in Frankfurt, which is one of those massive trade fairs full of stuff for the kitchen. And I just was so overwhelmed with how much stuff there is in the world that I was like, I'm never going to do this project. We don't need any more stuff. I'm not doing it. But I've come full circle and I'm like, right, I'm going to set circular economy boundaries for my projects from now on. And so this project is all about kind of revaluing vintage, beautiful old glassware. And I'm working with an incredible wood artisan, and he turns wood plates and bowls. So we found all these beautiful old uh, pieces of vintage glass, and we're designing plates and cork layers that go with them. And we're creating these totems. They're absolutely lovely totems that are both beautiful, aesthetic. They're like sculptures, but then they're functional. So you can take them apart and, you know, eat your salad or your breakfast or whatever and then you can, so it's a way of incorporating art into everyday life. So for me, that's the role of design. It's sort of finding kind of beauty and function together. To me, that's art.
Absolutely.
I really that is something that I'm really excited with that project. Hopefully by September we should be able to exhibit it. But watch this space, Nicola. I'll let you
Yes,
know.
well, that's very exciting, because there's so much stuff out there that can be, upcycled and changed into something even more beautiful. I remember even just seeing once somebody had made a broken teapot, and turned it into a little nesting box for birds.
Oh, lovely.
And
Yeah.
it just was you couldn't have made it, really, but just showing, you'd never have known that it was broken. And she just happened to say to me, oh, my teapot broke, and I didn't know what to do with it. And so she turned it into a nesting box. And I said, has it been used? Oh, yes, birds have been using it. So
Yeah, beautiful. I love that mindset. It's like everything has a value and a use. And I feel pained when I chuck things away that have a really high value when I've used it for like 2 seconds. It doesn't make any sense to me. The science part of my brain goes, no, absolutely not. What are you doing? This is ridiculous. What a waste. And the kind of
yeah,
resourceful part of me goes, it's the convenience part that I'm like, yeah, I understand, but this doesn't make sense.
yeah, yeah.
And
And there was a picture just the other day about these huge stockpiles of bikes. And it was this aerial photograph of this huge bike dump, most of them even brand new. And it just makes me think of Ecuador and all the children in Ecuador who just can't ever get hold of a bike. It's so expensive. There's no such thing as a second-hand bike market in the Amazon. And it's really sad to think that, here we have on one side of the world these stockpiles of really useful items, but that distribution of nutrients, that movement, which is so needed. And coming back to the forest, it's like, how do we share?
Well, yes, there's a sailing across Atlantic business model there to take bicycles to people who need them. Honestly, with a bit of kind of imagination and adventure and courage, there's so much that we can do. But there's a great company down. I'm based in the French Pays Basque, and there's a great company down here called Vela who are developing container-sized sailing vessels to kind of defeat carbon emissions through shipping. And to sail across the Atlantic. And they're doing some really interesting work, innovating with these kind of massive solar powered and kind of wind powered, kind of huge sailing vessels. So it'll be really exciting to see how that evolves.
It's happening, isn't it? I mean, I see that China has just launched its first electric cargo ship.
Yeah.
So, it is
I
happening.
didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah.
Nice.
We've got to
Nice,
keep
nice,
the
nice.
faith and remember that, the positive stuff is happening, and whatever role we're playing, that how can we kind of ripple that information by sharing information like this with each other. And so thank you so much, Alexie. We could chat for hours.
I know we could. Let's keep going. But I know today we can't. But Nicola, so lovely. Thanks for inviting me on the podcast. It's always a pleasure to chat. And yeah, let's keep the conversation going.
Yay. Thank you so much. And I'll put your details on at the end of the information. So thanks a lot, Alexie. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.